Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today it's another Bob Ross classic. Today it's Bob Ross Mountain Reflections. It's a painting which I've long admired. I actually painted it a few years ago for Bob's birthday celebration, a request from the Bob Ross company. Me and a lot of other people did our own versions of it. But there's always been something that's really bugged me about this painting, and it's something I want to address today. Can you guess what it is? Well, sit tight now. Watch the video all the way through because it's jam-packed full of my usual top tips and tricks, mistakes, fixes, escapes, all the usual fun that I have when I'm painting. So, you know the routine. Sit back, relax, cup of tea in that comfy chair and watch me paint Bob Ross Mountain Reflections. Happy painting, people. So here's my canvas, 16 inches by 20 and covered with grey gesso. I'm going to be using two Bob Ross 1-inch brushes for my painting, a nice old one for the liquid white and darks and a nice soft new one for some highlights. I'll also be using a fan brush, a filbert brush and a liner. Oops, sorry I've got the filbert. And of course a Bob Ross palette knife. This is a wet or wet oil painting technique and I'll be using some Bob Ross liquid white oil paint to prepare my canvas. I use it from a small airtight pot for ease of use. But before then, I want to put in the horizon line. I'll mark it with a couple of small map pins using my 1-inch brush to measure the distance from the base of my canvas. It's a handy measuring tool. Now, using my old 1-inch brush, I divide my canvas into 4 sections, and on each section I want to apply a very small amount of liquid white. I finish off with long, flat, even strokes. Remember, we want just a very thin coating. To test my canvas, I use my fingertips. There, that's about right. I made a video all about this, and I'll drop a link for it up here in the corner. Give it a watch. Now, here's my palette. It's not quite full yet, but we'll add these other colours later on. To start off with, I want to paint my sky, and for this I'm going to be using phthalo blue and black. I want a bright yet dark blue sky. I'm using my old 1-inch brush for this and I dry cleaned it. Now notice how I always pull the paint directly towards my thumb. It means I don't block another colour in on my palette. Tap the paint well through the bristles. Make sure it's well mixed. I'm going to start in the corners at the top. If it's too strong, I'd prefer it to be up there where I can easily blend it out. If you have too much on your brush, just knock a bit off on some paper towel. Now, let's have some little crisscross strokes. I want the colour to fade as it reaches the horizon line, but there's a problem. Can you see those 2 round blobs of dark colour? Stand back from your own paintings and make sure you haven't got dark corners. I sometimes call them panda's ears. Now, I'll speed my way through this bit, blending the colour down to my horizon line so it fades. There. Next, I'll add some water. And again, I'm going to start in the corners, pulling in from the edge to the centre. I lift off and leave a little area unpainted through the centre, like a shimmer of light, but take care that your painting doesn't sort of dip in the centre and that your horizon line is level. Mine is clearly a little bit wonky. It should have been up there. Never mind, a couple of strokes of the brush and it'll soon pull it straight. I think that's about right. Time for some planning. I want the main peak of my mountain to be about 1/3 from the left-hand side of my canvas. I'll also plot out and plan where I want some clouds. Here looks like a good spot. I'm going to use my fan brush and a tiny amount of bright red mixed into some titanium white. Just an off-white colour is what I'm looking for. Now remember, clouds need to be painted by leading your brush across the canvas. Brushes don't like to be pushed, a bit like people, they tend to push back. And I use little C shapes. C for cloud. I work on the bright, fluffy edge first, and as my brush runs out of paint, I do the middle of the cloud. I allow the brush to pick up some of the blue colour from the background sky to create a nice shadow. Let's swing my camera around to the side. I'm going to use my nice soft 1-inch brush for this blending motion. Notice how I use just a few hairs from the very top of my brush. I go close to the edge of the cloud, which should be brightest, and I pick up some paint and then I work down into the base of the clouds. Just small touches, working up and down, saving lots of shadow and detail as I blend. Now, soft upward strokes to fluff up the cloud, finishing off with some long flat strokes. Now, here's a happy accident, a cloud which, well, didn't quite work out. So, top tip, scrape it off, then use your dark blue brush to darken the sky again, and have another go. There, I'm much happier with that cloud. Time to paint a mountain. I'm going to take some Prussian blue, Van Dyke brown, some black and alizarin crimson. Mix it together very well to create a dark inky blue colour. If you struggle to paint mountains, this top tip may really help you. Scrape out the middle of the mountain as much as possible. This tiny little bit of liquid white and blue can really trip you up if you put on too much. Now, gather up a small roll of that dark mountain colour we just made. I want to use this to stain my canvas. And we're going to use firm pressure. Finger on the back of the knife, not down near that ring, but right in the centre, and really push this down into your canvas. Removing the liquid white and blue that was on there will give this paint every chance of sticking well. Keep the darkest colours in the peak of your mountain. Once you've completed it, go back and make any adjustments. I left a gap between those clouds in case I needed to make this peak a little larger. That was a bit of luck, wasn't it? Now, get tough. Scrape out every tiny bit of excess dark. Don't leave a drop. There. And with my blue brush, the one I started the painting with, I gently sweep away the excess paint. There's not much left, so you don't need to press too hard. Light pressure, leaving all the dark at the peak of the mountain. Knock off the surplus as you go. I want to leave a lovely pale base to my mountain, like it's floating on some mist. There, you can almost see my mountain shape developing. Just like the clouds, I want white with a hint of red, just off-white. This slightly soft colour is much easier on the eye. Now, a small roll of this paint is going to be used for applying some snowy effects. No fingers on the back of the knife, that's too much pressure. Hold your knife around that ring and kick the handle away from the canvas. Gentle pressure now, just kick the handle up, touch, and then let the paint break as you come down the mountain. Notice how I let the handle swing round towards the pin and I allow the blade to flatten. This takes some practice. Let's give that another go. It's actually harder to do slowly. It's much easier to do with a little bit of pace. Touch, handle away, and slowly let the paint break and aim for those pins. I want a shadow colour, so I take some white and a little Prussian blue. Take a small roll of colour. Make sure it's a good contrast to the snowy side and to the base colour. Now watch. I come up and I touch with a little snowy edge and push my mountain to one side. I can reform these peaks just by shoving the paint out the way. It's a neat trick and gets you some nice snowy effects. I'll repeat this on all the shadow sides of my mountain. think I want something in this area, but I need to get rid of some of the shadow colour. So scrape it off. It's going to be in your way. Now, more snow. Touch, light pressure, and aim for those pins. Now, here's a top tip for you. If you have problems making your peaks show up, then use a little bit of the base colour, that dark blacky blue colour we made. Just go back in and redefine some of the peaks. Then you can re-highlight them. It can really make a peak stand out, especially if it's been a bit lost amongst all the other highlights. You didn't think I forgot that one, did you? Just a little touch. And of course, it needs a shadow too. There. So as you see, my mountain's coming on rather well, but something really bothered me about this painting, and that's the name, Mountain Reflections. But there are no reflections of this mountain. Maybe it deserves that little extra twist from yours truly. Let's try a reflection. The easiest way to do a reflection of my mountain is simply to turn the canvas upside down. So I'll turn it over. But hang on, where's the fun in that? No, let's put it back and see if we can do it upside down. That's paint upside down, not paint it with me upside down. Okay, let's start with a little bit of planning. Let's map out where I think the main peaks are going to be. I'll just scratch them on the canvas and adjust them until I think I've got them right. Then it's just a repeat process of what I did above. Dark colour applied very thinly, and then make some adjustments. Brush it out and then add some shadow colour to the left hand side of the peaks, but obviously it's upside down. Apart from the sheer fun of doing it, there is a reason I'm doing this. It's to show you that, well, reflections don't have to be that accurate. As long as they're roughly in the right place, your eyes will tend to accept the detail is roughly right. So as long as everything is pointing in the right direction, your brain fills in the missing details. Now for another bravery test. I want to brush up and then brush across my reflections. I'll arm myself with a piece of paper towel, and with gentle pressure I do some little upward strokes. Start on the edges of the mountain and just press and little upward flick. I want to just disturb the paint to make it look like a nice watery reflection. The trick is not to smear the paint everywhere, so just short, quick upward strokes is what you need to perfect. Wipe the brush in between strokes. There. Now, gently across. Left, then right, then left and right again. Keep on wiping that brush. One last stroke and done it. Yes, yes, we've done it. Oh yes. I think you can tell I was a little bit pleased with myself. Time to tidy up my palette. Voila, done. I've added some fresh colours to the left hand side, and I've also added some sap green to my mountain colour, and I'll mix it in very well. I'm going to use the filbert brush to create the illusion of some nice distant bushes and trees along my horizon line. Just a small amount to get going. Now, let's put a few little touches here and there. Just pressing in with the brush, I want to sort of create the illusion of lots and lots of small bushes, maybe even some tiny little fir trees way back in the distance. I'm going to use my filbert brush to do the reflections as well. They're so small, these little trees and bushes, I think a 1-inch brush might be a little too big. There, that's about right. I want to paint those small fir trees, and I'm going to use my filbert brush to do it. I start off doing a centre line as usual, and then using the nice curved shape of the filbert brush, I just touch through that centre line to put on some branches. I often think of the filbert brush like a very small version of the oval brush. It makes fabulous trees, especially pines. Now, let's get a little bit of a closer look. I put the centre line on. Now, angle the brush down, plenty of paint, and just touch with the very tip of the brush. Before you know it, you've painted a miniature fir tree. Just to prove it wasn't a fluke, I'll add a friend. Maybe I'll add some more. There. They need a reflection, so I'll touch a little bit of colour down into the water. Again, they don't have to be too perfect. And for this bit, I will use my 1-inch brush, but super gentle. Touch and just a little flick down. Try and make sure your reflections are nice and straight. Dare I brush across? Yes. Just a couple of flicks is all it takes. And to finish it off, a little highlight. A small amount of cadmium yellow, just touched to the top of some of these trees and bushes. I use my palette knife to get a nice point at the top of my fir trees. Now, some water lines. I put out a small amount of liquid white and I tap my knife into that paint and I use firm pressure between the land and the reflections. Press and let the knife slide. It doesn't have to be a continuous line. A broken one works just as well. Time to do some foreground. I've gone back to my old 1-inch brush I started doing the sky with. I want to put in a lovely piece of foreground detail. Some nice trees and bushes. This paint wants to be very textured. Notice how I pull my 1-inch brush through the paint in one direction, rounded side to the top, and press into the canvas. Think about painting one little bush at a time. I think I'll paint some nice big fir trees now. I grew my fan brush, especially the corners, through that dark green colour. And don't forget the wiggle. That's the brush, of course, but you could wiggle if you wanted to. Now, let's put in the centre line. What do you think about that? It's a bit iffy, isn't it? The problem is, it sort of bumps into the edge of my mountain. It doesn't really stand out. We'll make it a little taller. I'll take care though, I don't want this to look like a blob of candy floss on a stick. Now, load your brush well. I'm going to be doing smiley little fir trees, and I press up with the corner of my fan brush. Just touch and press. Don't let the brush slide. Remember, we're creating texture. Texture that we can then highlight on. I like to fill in the centre line of my tree first. Once I've got that filled in, I can come back and adjust it and make it a little wider. Just add a few branches here and there. It doesn't take long before you've got a lovely fir tree, just the right size and shape. Let's give him a friend, and I'll fix that side in a minute. Top tip, if you're painting over a mountain and there's a lot of thick heavy white paint, scrape out a little bit of it. You'll find the paint sticks much easier. The centre line, fill in the middle, and then add some side branches. It's an easy technique and one you've seen me paint before. Now, let's do a leafy bush on the other side. Again, I start with the brush rounded side to the top and add one little bushy shape on top of another until I've got, well, almost a small tree. There. Problem is these two look very similar in size. I think I'm going to grow my fir tree a little taller, and then I can widen it at the base, and that sorts out that little sort of scruffy blue edge. That was lucky, wasn't it? Now, I want a tree trunk. I marble mix some dark sienna, ochre, and, well, some of this bluey white colour. Maybe even a little bit of the liquid white. Just a touch. Leave it all nice and marbled and pick up a very small roll of paint. And just touch in the centre line of those fir trees. It can be broken, it doesn't have to be continuous. Now, I want to use this fan brush again. I give it a little dry clean and then go straight into some of my cadmium yellow colour. I pull a little bit more sap green into it, and notice how I load just the edge of my brush. I just push back into that colour and get some right on the edge of the brush. Light's coming from the right, so I'm touching the branches on the right hand side, but I'm struggling to get my colour to stick. The paint is too thick, so I've added a tiny drop of liquid white to my palette. Now let's try again. Oh, wow, that colour really stands out. Just making the paint slightly softer enables it to stick to the dark underpainting. Remember, Bob told us, a thin paint will stick to a thick paint. I'll add some highlights to my little friend here, and then maybe as my brush runs out, I'll add a few little touches of detail to the dark side of the bigger tree. Time to highlight the bushes, and this is a technique I know some of you struggle with. I've got my nice brush and I'm going to pull it through my yellows and greens in one direction. Press the brush into the palette and watch the bristles splay apart. Most important, we get them splayed apart. Let's have a closer look. There, you see my bristles are not clogged, but they're all opened up and pulled back. This is essential that you have the paint sitting right on the tips of the bristles. I'm using very gentle pressure just to touch the canvas just outside the original dark shape of this bush. You want to apply just enough pressure for the paint to stick without sort of mashing the bristles into the painting. Saving a little shadow here and there. Top tip, wipe your brush a little before you reload it and keep your highlights nice and bright. Now let's try adding highlights here, but oh dear, that didn't work out so well. I pushed too hard. Let's fix it. I start by removing all that surplus highlight. Then I can re-darken the area with my underpainting colour. It'll stick nice and easily once you get rid of all the highlights. Now it's nice and dark, I can re-highlight it again. This is the way to repair your work rather than trying to apply more and more paint to the same spot. I vary my colours. That's Indian yellow with a touch of white. Now some cadmium yellow mixed in with it. Don't forget, press outwards, paint one bush at a time and save some dark. I said save some dark. I said save some... Oh, never take my own advice. I think this bush here is a little bit underwhelmed, so I've remixed some brighter colours, but take care. Re-highlighting something you've already done once is fraught with trouble and you might make a big smudge. You need to be very delicate if you do it. I've been super gentle with this. Now, time for some scratchy sticks and twigs. With what's left of my dark colours, which is why I saved them, I put in just a few little details. And finally, a few nice grasses. Just use the edge of your palette knife and push into the paint. But don't tell anyone how we did it. It's our secret. I think one final touch. A signature. And there we have it. Bob Ross, Mountain Reflections. A mountain with a reflection. So there you have it. My version of a Bob Ross classic, Mountain Reflections, a mountain and, of course, its reflection. Now, if you've enjoyed watching this, stick around for some more videos. I've got some lovely tutorials on painting mountains. In fact, I have a whole series of paintings just about mastering this technique. Happy painting, people. So there you have it, my version of a Bob Ross classic painting. Reflection. Something to my painting. Let's see if we can get that one right. Yeah,